David Clendon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm pleased to take an opportunity to speak in this appropriations debate. So, like Mr Hipkins, I found the first comments we heard from the Labor bench, from the government this afternoon, Mr Brownlee's comments were quite revealing in some ways. He spoke of the temerity of a Labor member who changed his mind as though that was a bad thing. I think it would be a very unfortunate situation if any of us as politicians or as parties were unwilling at any point to change our minds and to do so publicly. Change is often a good and positive thing. It is possible and often desirable, despite this constant refrain we hear from the government that we are somehow at the mercy of external forces and therefore are not masters of our own destiny and therefore must simply batten down the hatches and hide. I completely reject that proposition, despite it being quite fundamental and quite visible in the content of this budget this year. So the government's thinking seems to be limited to how little can be done, perhaps without upsetting their electorate apple cart, rather than thinking of how much can be done, how much better we could do, and what we might do to do better in this country. It lacks any recognition of opportunity for transformation, to do more, to do differently. So we need to do better, we can do better, and the Greens in government will do better than this rather poor offering we've been served up this week or last week. The claim that the Greens can do better is not a particularly bold claim, given the very low bar that has been set by this government in all of its actions, and particularly in terms of this budget. So I'd like to speak briefly to three aspects of the budget under the general heading of the justice portfolio, I guess. The police, first up. In about 2009, 2010, we started hearing about this new strategy, the Prevention First strategy, the idea being that, yes, let's nip it in the bud, let's reduce the number of victims, let's reduce offending by a proactive prevention strategy from police. The Greens applauded that approach. It was clearly in line with our own policy over many years, but we also blew a little bit of a concern, or expressed a concern, that in order for Prevention First to succeed as a strategy, it needed to be properly resourced and funded. And sadly, 2010, the year the strategy was rolled out, was a high point in terms of police funding. Ever since then, the police appropriation has been dropping in real terms. The police are being asked to do more and they're being given less with which to do it. And that's simply unsustainable and very unfortunate. We're pleased to see in this budget there is a small additional amount to enable a very modest and long overdue a pay increase for the police. That is obviously a good thing. But what we're not seeing is any evidence that this government has a clue, has a plan about how to actively implement a prevention strategy to invest up front and over time reduce offending, reduce crime, and in that way save money in the long term. Sadly, they seem determined simply to keep making cuts and hoping the problem will go away, which it patently will not. The police are stretched. It's reflecting in the thinness of the police presence, particularly in the regional areas and the provinces. It's reflected in evidence that morale in the police is not all it should be. The police get very frustrated with being criticised for not achieving certain outcomes when they do not have the wherewithal to achieve those outcomes. The simple indicators like the amount of leave that's building up, the amount of time off in lieu that police are not taking, their reluctance even to claim back reasonable expenses is all evidence of a police force under pressure, and that needs to be relieved very quickly or we'll find ourselves in serious trouble. So similarly with legal aid, there is some apparent good news in the budget that the government intends to commit an additional $54.5 million to legal aid. This is a nominal increase. It's a welcome increase, albeit long overdue. It's welcome because it at least does acknowledge on the government's part that there is a problem, something which they had been in denial about for quite a number of years. The opposition party, the Greens of course, the legal profession, some senior judiciary have all been pointing to major shortcomings in legal aid, support for people to get access to the justice system. At least the government now admits there is a problem. Unfortunately, however, this apparent increase still means that the legal aid funding will be about $2 million less for the estimates for the next year, about $2 million less than was actually spent last year, which was in itself completely inadequate. We desperately need to look at the income thresholds for legal aid. Currently, to get civil legal aid for a single person, the threshold is set slightly above $22,000, which means in practical terms, a person working more than 30 hours a week at the minimum adult wage would be deemed to be too high an income to qualify for legal aid. That is a nonsense, but it's a sad reflection of the lack of attention this government's given to access to justice, to ensure people have access to our courts and are properly defended if they do find themselves in the unfortunate situation of having to defend themselves in a court. So finally, I'd like to speak in the time I have of the Corrections Department and of the state of our prisons. And it's not a happy situation, as we know. There are some good strategies, there are some good documents. This government actually has made some comments and indicated some directions that are positive and indicate potential to do better. But again and again, they fail to put their money where their mouth is. They've come up with some quite good ideas and initiatives, but then they underfund them. They don't allow them to succeed, and therefore we're back to this budget is a prime example of that. It's massively over-investing in punitive measures, in containment, and there is simply not enough there for rehabilitation or reintegration, which are the long-term solutions to our excessive incarceration rate in New Zealand. Our prison muster is at an historic high, and it is forecast to continue to rise. We are bursting at the seams, and this government's only real solution seems to be more double bunking, and now we're hearing talk of yet another new prison. That is completely the wrong approach. Some justice reinvestment, a reallocation of the money away from steel and concrete and wire, spending it on people, spending it on programs that will actually turn lives around, that will change the behaviour of offenders and potential offenders. That's where we need to be spending, and that's where we ought to be spending. A year or so ago, of course, the government would have told us that private prisons are the solution, and hasn't that worked out well for them? Serco, of course, is an ongoing boil that is yet to be lanced. We look forward with interest to the report. That is that conversation for another day, but clearly the expectation, the assertion that privatisation of the prison regime would somehow give a better, more effective, improved outcomes has been seen to fail, and to fail badly. One of the better ideas this government has put into place is that every person entering prison to serve a sentence will have a needs assessment, an educational needs assessment, mental health assessment, drug and alcohol assessment. Excellent idea and long overdue, but that sort of, to be done properly and well, that needs to be resourced. We need to have very well trained, experienced people doing that assessment. My information is that despite the best efforts of some very, very good people in the system, that the level of assessment, the level of commitment to it is simply inadequate to generate the better outcomes we might hope for. We all want inmates to leave prison better than they went in. In order to achieve that, we need to get them onto programs. We need to get them thinking better, behaving better. The big bugbear at the minute in corrections seems to be scheduling. The Corrections Department seems incapable of ensuring that the appropriate programs are available to inmates at the appropriate time in their sentence, and that there is ongoing support for them on the day they leave prison. The scheduling regime is a complete fiasco, and it seems something that the Department is incapable of resolving. There is not one single dollar that I can see anywhere in the estimates this year that will serve to ameliorate that problem in terms of investment in better IT, in terms of investment in people, in terms of investing and changing the culture within our Corrections Department. So with the Corrections, just a matter of a few weeks ago, launched a drug and alcohol strategy, and it's an excellent strategy. It's perhaps not as good as it could be, but it's a damn good start to recognise that drug and alcohol abuse and addiction are major drivers of crime. a good strategy, no money behind it. This is a government that's frightened of its own shadow. It's frightened to commit to change. The Greens in government will do that. Thank you.